The city skyline shimmered under the golden hues of dusk as Ethan Carter stepped out of his sleek black car, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. As one of the most successful entrepreneurs in New York, Ethan was a man who commanded attention wherever he went. He had built an empire from the ground up, turning a small startup into a multi-billion-dollar corporation. But with power and wealth came an unshakable arrogance, a belief that his past was irrelevant, buried beneath the success he had cultivated. Tonight, he was on his way to an exclusive business gala, an event where the elite gathered to celebrate their accomplishments and secure even more lucrative deals. As he crossed the street toward the hotel entrance, something unusual caught his attention. A woman stood on the opposite sidewalk, struggling to hold the hands of four small children, all boys. They were laughing, talking over one another, their boundless energy making it difficult for her to keep them in line. But it wasn't their playful chaos that made Ethan stop in his tracks. It was their faces. Each of the four boys had his eyes, his jawline, and even the same way he furrowed his brow in thought. It was like looking into a mirror, except the reflections were of his childhood self. His pulse quickened as a strange, unfamiliar sensation twisted in his chest. The woman, unaware of Ethan's stare, knelt down to fix one of the boy's shoelaces. Her long brown hair cascaded over her shoulder, and as she looked up, their eyes locked. Isabel Monroe. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. It had been 6 years since he had last seen her, and yet time had done little to erase the familiarity in her face. The warmth in her brown eyes was the same, though now there was a quiet strength in them, a resilience that hadn't been there before. His mind reeled back to the past, to a version of himself that had once loved her, before his ambition had swallowed everything else. 6 years ago, Ethan had been a different man. He had been young, hungry for success, willing to sacrifice anything to get to the top. Back then, Isabel had been the love of his life, a woman who believed in him even when he had nothing. She had been his anchor, grounding him when the weight of his aspirations threatened to pull him under. But when an opportunity came that would take him to Europe for an indefinite period, he had chosen his career over love. He had left without saying goodbye, and now, standing just a few feet away, he was staring at 4 undeniable proofs of the life he had abandoned. Isabel's expression shifted from shock to something unreadable. She stood up, instinctively pulling her children closer to her. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of the city blurred around them, as if the world had faded into the background. Then Ethan took a step forward. "Isabel." His voice was hoarse, his carefully built composure cracking, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Ethan." The boys, now noticing their mother's tense stance, turned to look at him. One of them, the one standing closest to Isabel's side, tilted his head, observing Ethan curiously. "Mommy, who's that?" the boy asked. Isabel hesitated. Ethan could see the war waging behind her eyes. She exhaled sharply before crouching down to their level. "No one, sweetheart," she said softly, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Just someone I used to know." The words stung more than Ethan expected. Before he could say another word, Isabel gathered the boys and started walking away, disappearing into the crowd. Ethan remained frozen in place, his mind clouded with questions. Why hadn't she told him? Why had she never reached out? But deep down, he knew the real question was even more haunting. Would he have even answered if she had? Ethan stood in the middle of the sidewalk, his mind racing as the world around him moved on. Cars honked. People walked past him. The neon lights of the city blinked, but everything felt distant, like white noise. The image of the four boys, their faces so eerily familiar, refused to leave his mind. His chest tightened as he replayed the brief exchange with Isabel. She hadn't given him a second glance, hadn't allowed him a moment to process what he had just seen. She had taken the children and disappeared into the crowd as if he were nothing more than a stranger. But he wasn't a stranger, was he? A surge of unease coursed through him. Those boys weren't just random children. They were his. He felt it in his bones, in the way his gut twisted at the thought. Isabel had been pregnant when he left, and she had never told him. Ethan's fingers curled into fists at his sides. 1,000 thoughts swarmed in his head. Anger, guilt, disbelief. He had spent the last 6 years building his empire, believing that his sacrifices had been worth it, that leaving Isabel had been necessary. And yet, all this time, he had unknowingly abandoned not just her, but 4 innocent lives. He turned abruptly, scanning the street as if hoping to spot her again, but she was gone. His pulse pounded in his ears as he pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. Isabel's number wasn't there, of course. He had deleted it years ago in a pathetic attempt to move on. But there was one person who might know where she was. He dialed quickly. The call rang twice before a voice answered. "Ethan? Man, do you know what time it is?" It was Ryan, his old college friend, one of the few people who had known about his relationship with Isabel. Unlike Ethan, Ryan had stayed behind in the city, building a quiet life away from the corporate madness that Ethan had thrown himself into. "I need to find Isabel," Ethan said, ignoring the irritation in Ryan's voice. A pause, then a sigh. "Ethan, it's been years. Why now?" Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to keep his frustration in check. "Because I just saw her, and she had 4 kids with her, Ryan." Another pause. Ethan could practically hear the gears turning in Ryan's head. "Jesus, you didn't know, did you?" Ethan clenched his jaw. "No, I didn't." Ryan let out a long exhale. "She never mentioned them to you?" "She never reached out to me at all." Ethan's voice was sharper than he intended, but he couldn't help it. The idea that Isabel had carried his children, raised them on her own, while he had been oblivious, made something in him ache. Ryan was silent for a moment before speaking again. "I don't know exactly where she lives now, but she works at a small bookstore downtown, Page and Quill. She's been there for a while." Ethan's grip on his phone tightened. Isabel, the woman who had once dreamed of running her own publishing company, now worked at a bookstore? His stomach twisted. He didn't know why that detail affected him so much, but it did. "Thanks," he said, already hailing a cab. "Ethan, wait," Ryan said before he could hang up. "Don't mess this up. She's been through enough." Ethan didn't reply. He couldn't. Because deep down, he knew Ryan was right. The bookstore was nestled between 2 larger buildings, its warm lights spilling onto the sidewalk. Through the glass window, Ethan could see rows of wooden bookshelves and a cozy reading area near the back. Isabel was behind the counter, her hair pulled into a loose bun, scanning a book for a customer. Ethan hesitated at the entrance. For all his confidence in boardrooms and negotiations, for all the power he held in the business world, he found himself frozen at the threshold of this small, unassuming bookstore. Then, as if sensing his presence, Isabel looked up. The moment her eyes met his, her entire body tensed. She murmured something to the customer, handed them their receipt, and then walked to the back of the store without a word. Ethan exhaled and stepped inside, the scent of aged paper and fresh coffee filling the air. He followed her past the shelves, past the soft glow of reading lamps, until they were in a quiet corner, away from the few remaining customers. She turned to face him, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "What are you doing here, Ethan?" "I think you know why I'm here." His voice was steady, but inside he was anything but calm. "Isabel, are they mine?" Her jaw tightened. She looked away for a second, as if weighing whether or not to answer. Then, with a quiet breath, she said, "Yes." The air left his lungs in a rush. Even though he had suspected it, hearing it confirmed was something else entirely. Why didn't you tell me?" His voice was softer now, laced with something he wasn't used to feeling: regret. Isabel let out a dry laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Tell you? Ethan, you left. You made it very clear that your career was more important than anything else. You didn't even say goodbye. So tell me, what exactly was I supposed to do? Chase after you? Beg you to stay?" Ethan swallowed hard. "I didn't know. You didn't want to know," she corrected, her eyes flashing. "You walked away, Ethan. I had to figure it out on my own. And I did." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration boiling beneath the surface. "Isabel, they're my children. I have a right to know them." She let out a slow breath, rubbing her temple. "I won't stop you from knowing them," she admitted. "But they don't know who you are. They don't know anything about you. You can't just walk in and expect—" "I'm not expecting anything," he cut in, surprising even himself with the quiet desperation in his voice. I need to see them, to understand." She studied him for a long moment. Then, with reluctant resignation, she finally nodded. "Tomorrow, the park on Willow Street, 3 o'clock." Ethan felt his chest loosen, but before he could thank her, she added, "But if you hurt them, if you make promises you can't keep, Ethan, I swear you'll never see them again." Her voice was sharp, but beneath it, he heard something else: fear. Not for herself, but for the 4 little lives she had spent years protecting. "I won't," he promised. Isabel nodded once, then turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing there, trying to process the reality that his life had just changed forever. Ethan barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them. The 4 boys, their faces so strikingly similar to his own. It wasn't just the resemblance that haunted him. It was the years. 5 whole years had passed, and he hadn't been there. He hadn't known. Isabel had carried this weight alone, raising 4 children while he had thrown himself into building his business, convincing himself that success required sacrifice. But he had never considered that the sacrifice might have been more than just a relationship. It had been a family. By the time the morning sun bled through the curtains of his penthouse, he had made up his mind. He wouldn't let the past dictate his future. He was going to be there for them, no matter what it took. The hours dragged by, until finally 3 o'clock arrived. Ethan parked near Willow Street Park, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. He wasn't a man who second-guessed himself. He had built his company on sharp instincts and decisive action, but this was different. He had no strategy for this, No carefully planned speech. All he had was uncertainty. Stepping out of the car, he spotted them immediately. Isabel was sitting on a bench near the playground, a book in her lap, though she wasn't reading it. Instead, her eyes were locked on the four boys playing just a few feet away: Lucas, Noah, Liam, and Oliver, his sons. Ethan's chest tightened as he took them in. Lucas was racing toward the slide, his laughter filling the air. Liam was close behind, ever the competitor. Noah was crouched on the grass, seemingly fascinated by something tiny crawling beneath his fingers, while Oliver, the quietest, stood back, watching the others with observant eyes. They had no idea who he was. Taking a deep breath, Ethan approached. Isabel noticed him immediately, her posture stiffening as she stood up. He could tell she was second-guessing this decision, and part of him didn't blame her. "You came," she said, her voice careful, neutral. "I told you I would." She studied him for a moment before nodding slightly. "They don't know you're their father. I wasn't sure how to—" "I don't expect you to just drop that on them." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "I just want to meet them, however you think is best." Isabel hesitated, but then turned toward the playground. "Boys!" she called, her voice warm but firm. "Come here for a second." The four of them came running, their faces flushed from playing, their excitement uncontained. It hit Ethan like a blow. How real they were, how full of life. "Guys, this is Ethan," Isabel said carefully, glancing at him before continuing. "He's an old friend of mine." Old friend. The word stung, but he understood why she said them. The boys looked up at him, curiosity flashing in their eyes. Lucas was the first to step forward, bold and unafraid. "Hi, Ethan," he said, tilting his head. "Are you Mommy's friend?" Ethan swallowed, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I used to know your mom a long time ago." Liam crossed his arms. "You don't look like Mom's other friends. They're all ladies." A laugh bubbled from Ethan's chest, despite the weight of the moment. "I guess I'm the first guy then." Noah, the quiet one, was still staring at him, his brow furrowed, as if trying to solve a puzzle. Oliver stood next to him, mirroring the expression. "You kind of look like us," Noah finally said, his voice thoughtful. Ethan felt his pulse spike, but before he could respond, Lucas grinned. "Yeah, you have the same eyebrows as me, and your nose looks like Liam's." Ethan glanced at Isabel, who remained silent, watching closely. This was dangerous territory, but before the questions could spiral further, she gently redirected them. "Ethan's visiting for a little while. Why don't you show him around?" Lucas didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed Ethan's hand and practically dragged him toward the playground, chattering away about how he was the fastest at the monkey bars. The others followed, albeit with varying levels of enthusiasm. For the next hour, Ethan let himself be pulled into their world. He helped push them on the swings, raced against Lucas and Liam, losing on purpose, which they found hilarious, and listened as Noah passionately explained the difference between ants and beetles. Oliver was quieter, more reserved, but every so often, Ethan would catch him staring, as if trying to figure something out. At some point, Isabel had moved to a bench, watching from a distance, giving them space. It felt natural. It felt terrifying, because with every laugh, every excited voice calling his name, Ethan realized how much he had already missed. Their first steps, their first words, every scraped knee, every bedtime story. And yet, here they were, looking at him with something dangerously close to trust. As the sun began to set, Isabel called them over. "Time to go home, guys." A chorus of groans erupted, but they obeyed. Lucas, still full of energy, ran ahead with Liam, while Noah lagged behind, picking up a particularly interesting rock. Oliver, however, lingered. He looked up at Ethan, his small face thoughtful. "Are you coming back?" The question nearly shattered him. He crouched down to Oliver's height, his voice softer than before. "Do you want me to?" Oliver nodded. Ethan felt his throat tighten. "Then I'll come back." A small smile tugged at Oliver's lips before he ran after his brothers. Ethan stood, meeting Isabel's gaze. "You did good today," she admitted quietly. "I don't just want to be a visitor, Isabel." His voice was steady, but the weight of his words hung between them. "I want to be part of their lives." She sighed, rubbing her temple. "It's not that simple, Ethan." "I know." He hesitated before adding, "But let me try." Isabel looked away for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a quiet exhale, she nodded. "We'll take it one step at a time." It wasn't everything, but it was something. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about them. The sound of their laughter, the way Lucas had gripped his hand without hesitation, the way Oliver had looked up at him and asked if he would come back. It had been a single afternoon, yet it had shaken him more than anything in his life. He had built an empire from nothing, faced ruthless competitors, negotiated million-dollar deals without flinching. And yet, the idea of winning the trust of 4 little boys felt like the greatest challenge he had ever encountered. He spent the next few days resisting the urge to call Isabel. He knew she needed time. She had spent years building a life without him, and he couldn't expect her to suddenly open the door and let him in completely. But he also knew he couldn't wait forever. Finally, on the third evening, he sent her a message. "Ethan, can I see them again? Maybe this weekend?" The 3 dots appeared almost instantly, then disappeared. He stared at his screen, feeling an unfamiliar wave of nerves. Then finally, her response came. "Isabel, we're going to the farmer's market on Saturday morning. If you want to meet us there, you can, but only if you're serious about being consistent." He exhaled, tension easing from his shoulders. "Ethan, I'll be there." When Saturday arrived, he found himself standing at the entrance of the bustling farmer's market, scanning the crowd for them. He spotted them near a fruit stand, the boys moving excitedly from one display to another, while Isabel tried to keep them from knocking over entire baskets of apples. Lucas was the first to see him. "Ethan!" he shouted, waving wildly before dashing toward him. Ethan crouched just in time for Lucas to barrel into him. "You came!" "Of course," Ethan said, ruffling his hair. "Did you think I wouldn't?" Lucas grinned. "Mom says we shouldn't expect people to always keep promises, but I knew you would." The weight of that statement hit him like a blow, but before he could respond, Liam and Noah arrived, each greeting him in their own way. Liam challenged him to a race down the walkway, and Noah immediately began explaining how carrots and potatoes grow underground. Oliver, true to form, stayed back for a moment, observing, before finally walking up and giving Ethan a small nod. Isabel approached, arms crossed, but with a small, unreadable smile. I see you made an impression. Ethan shrugged, though he felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. They're easy to like. They're also a handful, she said, glancing toward Liam, who was now trying to convince a vendor to let him hold a baby chick. Ethan smiled. I think I can handle it. She gave him a skeptical look, but didn't argue. All right then. You're here, so let's see how you do. They spent the morning weaving through stalls, the boys pulling Ethan into their world with ease. He found himself carrying bags of fresh fruit, stopping to tie Noah's untied shoelaces, and lifting Oliver up so he could see the homemade honey jars better. At one point, Lucas and Liam insisted on buying a loaf of freshly baked bread, and Ethan let them, grinning as they proudly handed over crumpled dollar bills from their tiny backpacks. It was normal. It was chaotic. And it was perfect. As they sat at a picnic table to eat some of the food they'd bought, Ethan watched Isabel as she carefully peeled an orange for Noah. She looked different in the daylight, in the midst of all this simplicity. He remembered the way she had once been, the woman who used to curl up on his couch, stealing his sweatshirts, talking about dreams she hadn't yet dared to chase. He had loved her then. And now, seeing her like this, he realized he had never stopped. You're good at this, he said suddenly. She looked up, surprised. At what? Being a mom. Her expression softened, but there was still a trace of caution in her eyes. I had no choice but to be. Ethan nodded, guilt pressing against his ribs. I should have been here. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced at the boys, who were currently making a mess of their peanut butter sandwiches. Then finally, she sighed. Yeah, you should have. The honesty in her voice hurt, but it was deserved. He had missed everything, but he wouldn't miss anything else. I want to make it right, Isabel. His voice was steady. Not just for them, but for you too. She studied him carefully. I don't need you to make it right for me, Ethan. I just need to know that you're not going to walk away again. I won't. She held his gaze, searching for something. Maybe a lie, maybe weakness, but he had nothing to hide. Finally, she nodded. Okay, then we'll see. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. As the afternoon went on, Ethan felt himself fitting into their world, piece by piece. When they finally packed up to leave, the boys were tired but happy, each one saying goodbye in their own way. Oliver was the last to leave his side. He hesitated, then tugged at Ethan's sleeve. Will you come next time too? Ethan crouched down, meeting his eyes. Do you want me to? Oliver nodded. Ethan smiled. Then I will. And this time, he meant it. Ethan found himself looking forward to Saturdays more than he ever had before. It had only been a few weeks since that first visit to the farmer's market. But in that short time, something had shifted. He was no longer just an outsider trying to force his way into their lives. The boys had begun to expect him, and Isabel, while still wary, no longer treated his presence as a temporary inconvenience. The change was subtle at first. She stopped hesitating before responding to his texts. When he offered to pick up the boys from school one afternoon, she agreed without questioning his ability to handle them. And when Liam scraped his knee during a game of tag at the park, she let Ethan be the one to clean him up, watching from a few steps away instead of immediately stepping in. One evening, as Ethan sat on his couch, scrolling through pictures he had taken of the boys earlier that day. He realized how much they had already become a part of him. He had spent so many years convincing himself that he didn't need a family, that love was a distraction, that commitment was a weight he wasn't built to carry. But here he was, feeling more at home in their presence than he had in any of the penthouses, offices, or high-rise boardrooms he had spent his life chasing. He wanted more. So, the following Saturday, when he arrived at Isabel's house to pick up the boys for an afternoon at the zoo, he found himself pausing before knocking on the door. He could hear their voices inside, shouting excitedly about which animals they wanted to see first. He smiled to himself, then knocked twice. The door swung open, and Isabel stood there, dressed casually in jeans and a simple sweater. She looked at him for a moment, then stepped aside to let him in. "They're almost ready," she said, motioning toward the living room, where Noah was struggling to tie his sneakers while Lucas impatiently bounced on the couch. Ethan walked in, crouching beside Noah. "Need some help?" Noah nodded wordlessly, his small hands fumbling with the laces. Ethan guided him through the steps, showing him how to make the loops. It was a small thing, but when Noah finally managed to tie them himself, his face lit up with pride. "Did it," he said, beaming up at Ethan. "You sure did, buddy." Ethan ruffled his hair. "You'll be teaching me soon." Behind them, Isabel watched quietly. He didn't have to turn to see her, but he could feel the shift in the air. He had learned to recognize it. The moments when she was seeing him differently, when her guard lowered just a little more. When they finally arrived at the zoo, the boys ran ahead, their excitement impossible to contain. Ethan walked beside Isabel, stealing glances at her as she watched them. "Thank you," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. He looked at her in surprise. "For what?" "For being patient, for proving me wrong." He stopped walking, forcing her to turn toward him. "Isabel, I never wanted to prove you wrong. I just wanted to prove that I meant it this time." She held his gaze, and for the first time in years, he saw something in her expression that wasn't just guarded skepticism. There was something softer there, something hesitant, but real. "Let's just enjoy today," she said finally, her voice quieter. He nodded. "Okay, today." And so they did. The boys pulled them from one exhibit to another, pointing at the giraffes, feeding the goats, and laughing at the monkeys swinging from branch to branch. At one point, Oliver tugged on Ethan's sleeve and pointed to a father and son standing near the elephant enclosure. "That's what you and me look like, huh?" Oliver asked, his small voice full of curiosity. Ethan swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. "Yeah, I guess it is." Oliver seemed to think about that for a moment before reaching up and taking Ethan's hand without another word. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt something unshakable settle deep within him. He wasn't just playing a role anymore. He wasn't just trying to make up for lost time. He was theirs, and they were his. The day ended with ice cream, sticky fingers, and exhausted but happy children. When they finally arrived back at Isabel's house, the boys ran inside, leaving Ethan and Isabel standing at the front door. She hesitated, then looked up at him. "You want to come in?" It wasn't just an invitation to step inside the house. It was an invitation into something more. Ethan took a deep breath, then nodded. Yes. Ethan stepped inside, feeling a strange sense of familiarity wash over him. He had been here before, in this house. But this time, it felt different. It wasn't just a place where Isabel and the boys lived. It was a home, one he had spent years unknowingly yearning for. The warmth of it settled over him, grounding him in a way that no lavish penthouse ever had. The boys had already disappeared into the living room, their laughter echoing through the space. Isabel walked ahead, pausing only briefly before glancing back at him. "You want some coffee?" Ethan smiled. "Yeah, coffee sounds good." She led him into the kitchen, moving with the ease of someone who had perfected a routine. He leaned against the counter, watching as she filled the coffee maker, her movements quick and efficient. For a moment, neither of them spoke, and the silence felt heavier than usual. "I know this is new for you," Isabel said finally, keeping her focus on the machine in front of her. "Being around them like this. Being here." Ethan nodded, knowing she wasn't wrong. "It is, but it's not something I want to run from." She turned then, her gaze sharp but searching. "Are you sure? Because I can't afford to have you change your mind, Ethan. They can't afford it." Something inside him clenched at her words. He understood her fear. He had given her every reason to doubt him, to believe that this was temporary, that he would eventually get overwhelmed and walk away. But that wasn't who he was anymore. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice steady. "Not again." She studied him for a moment longer, as if trying to decide whether or not she could believe him. Then she nodded and turned back to the coffee. "Good." They sat at the small kitchen table, the space between them filled with unspoken words. The coffee was hot, but Ethan barely noticed. His mind was too focused on Isabel, on the way her fingers traced patterns against the side of her mug, on the way she kept stealing glances at him when she thought he wasn't looking. Finally, she broke the silence. "I used to imagine this, you know." He frowned. "Imagine what?" "This? You? Here? With them?" She let out a small, humorless laugh. "It was a foolish thought back then, but there were nights when I would wonder what it would have been like if you had stayed." Ethan's heart ached at the confession. "I should have," he admitted. "I should have been here for you, for them." She shook her head. "There's no changing the past." "No," he agreed, "but there's still time to change the future." The weight of those words settled between them, thick with meaning. Isabel looked away first, as if afraid of what she might say if she held his gaze for too long. Instead, she set her mug down and stood. "It's late," she said, a quiet way of ending the conversation. Ethan understood. He stood too, but before he could move toward the door, small footsteps padded into the kitchen. Oliver appeared first, rubbing his tired eyes. "Mommy, can Ethan tuck us in?" Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He looked at Isabel, waiting for her reaction. She hesitated, then let out a slow breath before nodding. "Okay," she said, "but just for tonight." That was enough. Ethan followed Oliver upstairs, finding the other boys already curled up in bed. The room was dimly lit, the soft glow of a nightlight casting shadows against the walls. He moved carefully, tucking each of them in, smoothing the blankets over their small bodies. "Will you be here tomorrow?" Lucas asked sleepily. Ethan knelt beside him, brushing a hand over his hair. "Yeah, buddy, I'll be here." Noah yawned, his voice barely above a whisper. "Promise." Ethan swallowed past the lump in his throat. "I promise." As he stood, he felt a tug at his sleeve. Liam looked up at him. his expression serious despite the exhaustion in his eyes. "Good night, Dad." The word hit Ethan like a punch to the chest. Dad. He hadn't expected it. He hadn't dared to hope for it. But there it was, spoken so naturally, as if it had always been true. Ethan didn't trust himself to speak. Instead, he squeezed Liam's hand, letting the moment settle deep within him. When he turned toward the doorway, he found Isabel standing there, watching. Her expression was unreadable, but something in her eyes had softened. He stepped closer to her, lowering his voice. "Thank you." "For what?" she asked. "For letting me be part of this." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Good night, Ethan." He didn't push for more. He simply smiled, stepped past her, and made his way downstairs. As he walked to his car, he felt something he hadn't in years. Hope. Ethan couldn't get the moment out of his head. The way Liam had called him Dad, so effortlessly, so naturally, as if it had always been his title. It stayed with him the entire drive home, through the restless night, and into the early morning, as he sat in his office, staring blankly at his laptop. It was a single word, yet it carried a lifetime of weight. It was everything he had once believed he wasn't capable of being, and now it was his reality. For days, he showed up to Isabel's house without fail. Each morning, he helped the boys get ready for school. Each afternoon, he listened to them recount their day as they ran toward him with excitement. He helped with homework, sat through their soccer practices, and even learned the chaos of bedtime routines. He was fully immersed in their world, a world he never knew he needed, but now couldn't imagine being without. At first, Isabel remained distant. She let him be there, but she didn't let him in. She watched him with cautious eyes, never quite allowing herself to believe that he was staying. But as the days turned into weeks, Ethan started to see the way her walls began to crack. It was in the small things. The way she no longer tensed when he reached for a glass in her kitchen. The way she didn't immediately change the subject when he mentioned the past. The way her gaze softened when she caught him carrying a sleeping Noah to bed. One evening, after the boys had gone to sleep, Ethan found himself lingering in the living room. Isabel was sitting on the couch, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, her expression unreadable. He hesitated before sitting down beside her, keeping enough space between them to remind her that he wouldn't push, that he was willing to wait. She exhaled softly, staring at the steam rising from her cup. "You're really doing this," she said, almost to herself. Ethan turned toward her, his voice gentle. "Doing what?" "Being a father." She lifted her gaze to meet his. "I spent so many years convincing myself you wouldn't come back, that I had to do this alone. And now—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "I don't know what to do with this version of you." He swallowed the lump in his throat. "I don't expect you to just forgive me, Isabel. I know how much I hurt you. I know how much I missed. But I also know that I can't change the past. All I can do is prove to you every day that I'm not the same man who walked away." She studied him for a long moment, as if searching for any cracks in his resolve. Finally, she sighed, setting her cup down on the coffee table. "You're not the same," she admitted, "but that doesn't erase the pain of what happened." "I know." He hesitated, then leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I need you to know something. That night, the night I left, it wasn't because I didn't love you." He She stiffened, and he could see the way her fingers curled against her lap. He had never spoken about that night before, never given her an explanation. He knew she had spent years wondering why, hating him for leaving without a word. I was terrified, he continued. I thought I wasn't enough, that I would never be enough. I convinced myself that you deserved better, that our life together would never be what you wanted. He let out a breath, shaking his head. But the truth is, leaving you was the worst mistake I've ever made. Isabel's expression remained guarded, but he could see the conflict in her eyes, the pain, the doubt, the small flicker of something else, something that looked dangerously close to hope. She didn't say anything right away. Instead, she stood, walking toward the window. She looked out at the backyard, at the swing set where their boys had spent the afternoon playing. They're happy with you here, she murmured. I can see it in the way they look at you. The way they run to you first when something exciting happens. It's like they've been waiting for you all this time. Ethan stood as well, stepping closer, but keeping enough distance to respect the space she still needed. I've been waiting for them too, he admitted. I just didn't know it. She turned back to face him, and for the first time, he saw something shift in her expression. It wasn't full acceptance, but it was something close, a step forward. You say you're staying, she said quietly. But what happens when things get hard? When life isn't just bedtime stories and soccer games? When they start asking real questions about why you left? Ethan held her gaze, his voice unwavering. Then I answer them. Honestly, I don't run this time. For the first time in years, Isabel let her guard down just enough to let him see the fear beneath it all. Not just fear of him leaving again, but fear of allowing herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he really was here to stay. She nodded once, as if coming to a silent decision. Okay, she whispered. Ethan exhaled, feeling something inside him settle. He knew this wasn't the end of their conversation, that there was still so much work to do. But for now, this was enough. A beginning. And he wasn't going anywhere. Ethan didn't take Isabel's hesitant okay for granted. He knew it wasn't a promise, but rather an opening. A small, fragile space where trust might grow again. He treated it with the care it deserved. Each day, he continued showing up, not just for the boys, but for Isabel too. He didn't push her, didn't ask for more than she was willing to give. He simply remained consistent, present, and patient. The boys had started calling him Dad naturally now, and every time it happened, Ethan felt something in his chest tighten. It was a mixture of joy and guilt, the overwhelming realization of how much he had missed and how much he still had to make up for. But he was learning to accept that he couldn't rewrite the past, only build a future worth staying for. One evening, after an exhausting but fulfilling day with the boys, Ethan found himself lingering in the kitchen as Isabel cleaned up after dinner. He picked up a towel and began drying the dishes she washed, falling into an easy rhythm beside her. It was a domestic simplicity he had never experienced before, and he found himself cherishing the quiet normalcy of it. You don't have to do that, Isabel said, not unkindly, glancing at him from the corner of her eye. I know, he said, setting a plate aside. I want to. A silence stretched between them, comfortable but charged with unspoken thoughts. Isabel finally sighed and leaned against the counter, drying her hands. They love you, she murmured, nodding toward the hallway where the boys had disappeared moments ago. I can see it every day. How they look at you, how they light up when you're around. Ethan swallowed, unsure of what to say. Instead of filling the silence with empty words, he let her continue. I spent years preparing myself for the moment they'd ask about you, she admitted. I told myself I'd be strong, that I'd tell them the truth without letting it hurt me. But now, she looked down at her hands, flexing her fingers as if trying to work out the tension in them. Now you're here, and they don't even have to ask. You just stepped in, and suddenly you're the father they always needed. Ethan exhaled, his hands tightening around the dish towel. I know I don't deserve how easily they accepted me, he said quietly. I know I don't deserve how open their hearts are. But Isabel, I'm here because I want to be, because I need to be, for them, for you, if you'll let me. Her breath hitched, and for the first time in weeks, he saw raw emotion break through the wall she had built so carefully. But just as quickly as it appeared, she reined it back in, shaking her head. It's not that simple, she whispered. I know, he said, stepping closer, but still respecting her space. But I'll wait for you, Isabel, as long as it takes. She looked up at him then, eyes searching his, as if trying to find proof of his sincerity. Whatever she saw made her lips part slightly, made something flicker behind her gaze. She didn't answer, but she didn't push him away either. And for now, that was enough. Days passed, and Ethan continued integrating himself into their lives. He started picking the boys up from school, joining their bedtime routines, even attending their parent-teacher meetings. Slowly, but surely, he became a part of their world in a way that felt natural. But not everyone was happy about it. One afternoon, as Ethan was leaving the boys' school, he spotted Isabel's friend, Melanie, waiting by her car. She had been one of Isabel's closest confidants for years, and though she had been polite to Ethan, she had never truly warmed up to him. Today, however, her expression was more than just wary. It was openly hostile. You've been back for what, 2 months now? She asked, crossing her arms as he approached. Ethan stopped, tensing. Closer to 3, he said carefully. She scoffed, shaking her head. And you really think that's enough to undo 5 years of absence? Ethan clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay calm. I don't think anything can undo what I did, he admitted, but I'm doing everything I can to make things right. Melanie took a step closer, her gaze sharp. And what happens when it gets too hard? When the reality of being a full-time father isn't just bedtime stories and playing catch in the park? Are you going to disappear again? Ethan stiffened. It wasn't an unfair question. It was, in fact, the very same fear Isabel had voiced. He took a deep breath before answering. No, he said firmly. I won't. Melanie studied him for a long moment before sighing. For their sake, I hope that's true, she muttered, shaking her head. Because if you break their hearts, Ethan, I swear I will never forgive you. Ethan didn't flinch at the threat. He had no doubt that if he ever hurt Isabel or the boys again, he wouldn't just be losing their trust. He would be losing everything. He watched as Melanie walked away, and though her words stung, he knew she was right to question him. He had a lifetime to prove that he wouldn't walk away again, and he intended to do exactly that. Later that night, as he sat with Isabel on the back porch, watching the boys chase fireflies in the yard, He found himself thinking about the life he had almost missed out on. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but it was real. It was laughter in the evenings, scraped knees that needed bandaging, tiny arms wrapping around his waist without hesitation. He turned to Isabel, who was smiling softly as she watched their children. "I love them," he said suddenly. "I know you already know that, but I need to say it. I love them more than I ever thought I was capable of loving anything." Isabel's smile faltered, but she didn't turn away. Instead, she looked at him, really looked at him, and nodded. "I know." It was only 2 words, but to Ethan, they meant everything. Ethan had never been a man who feared challenges, but this was different. Winning over his children had been one thing. Earning Isabel's trust again was an entirely different battle. She was careful, guarded, always waiting for the moment he might slip back into his old ways. He didn't blame her. If the roles were reversed, he wasn't sure he would have been as patient as she had been, but he wasn't going to give up. One evening, after putting the boys to bed, Ethan lingered in the kitchen, leaning against the counter as Isabel wiped down the table. It had become their quiet ritual, these stolen moments when the house had finally settled into silence. He watched her, the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the way her shoulders sagged just slightly from exhaustion. "You should sit," he said, setting his glass down. "You've been running around all day." She huffed a quiet laugh. "Welcome to motherhood." "I mean it, Isabel," he said softly. "You do so much. You always have." She stilled for just a fraction of a second, then continued wiping the table, though her movements were slower now. "It's what they deserve," she murmured. "I know," Ethan said. "And so do you." That time she did pause, her hand tightening around the cloth. A moment later, she sighed, shaking her head. "Ethan, I'm not trying to push," he assured her. "I just want you to know that I see you. I see everything you've done, everything you continue to do, and I appreciate it more than I can put into words." Her fingers relaxed slightly, and for the first time in weeks, she looked at him without the guarded hesitation she usually carried. "You're different," she admitted, studying him as if trying to determine whether or not she could believe it. "Not just with them, but with me." "I want to be," he said simply. "For them, yes, but also for you." Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. "Ethan, I know it's not that easy," he interrupted gently. "And I don't expect you to just let everything go. I hurt you, and I will never forgive myself for that. But Isabel, I never stopped." He hesitated, taking a deep breath before finishing. "I never stopped loving you." She inhaled sharply, her eyes widening slightly, before she quickly looked away. Her hands clenched at her sides, as if she were trying to hold herself together. "That doesn't change what happened." "No, it doesn't," he agreed. "But it's the truth." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Isabel sighed, rubbing a hand over her forehead. "I don't know if I can do this again," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Ethan stepped forward, cautious but determined. "Then don't," he said. "Don't think of it as doing it again. Think of it as something new, something better." She finally looked up at him, her eyes filled with emotions too complex to name. She exhaled slowly, shaking her head with a small, tired laugh. You're really not going anywhere, are you? He smiled, shaking his head. Not a chance. Something in her expression softened, and though she didn't say anything more, Ethan knew he had taken another small step forward. But just as things seemed to be settling into something hopeful, the past came back with a vengeance. The next morning, as Ethan was getting the boys ready for school, Isabel's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She glanced at it, and the color drained from her face. Ethan noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" She picked up the phone, hesitated, then turned the screen toward him. His stomach twisted as he read the message. "You really think he's changed? How naive, Isabel. You'll regret this." There was no name, no indication of who had sent it, but Ethan had a sick feeling in his gut. "Stella," Isabel murmured, her grip tightening on the phone. Ethan exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "I should have known she wouldn't let this go." "She's been quiet for weeks," Isabel muttered. "I thought maybe she'd finally moved on." Ethan shook his head. "Stella doesn't move on. She finds new ways to manipulate." Isabel clenched her jaw. "I won't let her ruin this, Ethan." "I won't either," he promised. But deep down, he knew Stella wasn't done yet. She never made empty threats, and if she was reaching out now, it meant she had something planned. That evening, after the boys were asleep, Ethan met Isabel on the porch. She was already outside, arms crossed tightly over her chest as she stared at the darkened horizon. "She won't stop," Isabel said before he could even speak. "She'll do everything she can to turn this against you." Ethan stepped closer. "Then we'll be ready." She turned to face him, her expression filled with worry. What if she goes after the boys? What if she tries to take this to court again? Ethan clenched his fists. "She won't win." "You don't know that." "I do," he insisted. "Because this time, I won't let her manipulate things. She has no claim here, Isabel. The court's already ruled in our favor, and even if she tries to spin some new story, she has no legal ground to stand on." She exhaled shakily. "I don't want to go through another battle, Ethan." He reached out, gently touching her arm. "You're not alone this time." For the first time that night, she looked up at him with something close to trust. And despite the storm brewing on the horizon, Ethan knew that together they could face whatever came next. Ethan had spent his entire life chasing success, but for the first time, he realized that nothing mattered more than the people standing beside him. The fight with Stella wasn't over, and deep down, he knew she wouldn't back down without causing as much damage as possible. But this time, he wasn't alone. Isabel stood by his side, and their children were his greatest reason to keep fighting. Days passed with an uneasy quiet. Isabel continued receiving anonymous messages, each more insidious than the last. Some were filled with doubt, warning her that Ethan would eventually walk away again. Others hinted at something more sinister, as if Stella was laying the groundwork for something far worse. Isabel was strong, but Ethan could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She had carried the weight of their family alone for years, and now, just when she was beginning to let her guard down, Stella was trying to drag her back into fear. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Ethan reached for Isabel's hand. She hesitated for a brief moment before letting their fingers intertwine. "She won't win," he said quietly. "No matter what she tries, she won't come between us." Isabel exhaled slowly, her thumb brushing absent-mindedly over his knuckles. I want to believe that, she admitted, but I also know what she's capable of. Ethan tightened his grip. So do I, but I also know that she doesn't have the power she used to. She's desperate, Isabel, and desperate people make mistakes. Just as the words left his mouth, his phone buzzed. When he glanced at the screen, his jaw tightened. It was a message from an unknown number. You think you've won? You have no idea what's coming. Ethan clenched his teeth, shoving the phone into his pocket. Isabel saw the look in his eyes and sat up straighter. What is it? He shook his head. Nothing we didn't already know. But he was wrong, because the next morning, everything changed. A letter arrived at Isabel's doorstep, official, stamped, and unmistakable. A legal petition. Ethan read through it, his hands shaking with anger. Stella was challenging their custody arrangement. She wasn't just trying to take the boys away. She was accusing Isabel of being an unfit mother, of manipulating the children against their father, of fostering a toxic environment that would harm their development. Isabel read the letter in stunned silence. When she finally looked up, her eyes were filled with fury and something deeper, fear. She's trying to take them away, she whispered. Ethan took the letter from her hands, his entire body vibrating with anger. She won't. But the words felt empty. Because in a courtroom, it wasn't about who was right. It was about who could present the most convincing argument. Stella had money, connections, and a ruthless ability to twist the truth. Ethan knew what she was capable of, and now she was playing her final hand. The next few days were a blur of meetings with attorneys, gathering evidence, preparing for a legal battle neither of them had wanted. Ethan refused to let Isabel go through it alone. He sat beside her in every meeting, pored over every document, and reminded her over and over again that they were in this together. When the day of the hearing arrived, the air was thick with tension. Ethan walked into the courtroom with Isabel, their hands locked tightly together. Across the room, Stella sat beside her lawyer, dressed in calculated elegance, her expression unreadable. The proceedings began, and Stella's attorney wasted no time launching into his argument. He painted Isabel as a struggling single mother who had manipulated Ethan into believing she was the only one capable of raising their children. He argued that the boys would have a better future under Ethan's care, backed by Stella's guidance and support. He even suggested that Isabel's refusal to cooperate with Ethan in the past was proof of her inability to co-parent. Isabel sat stiffly beside Ethan, her nails digging into her palm. When it was their turn to speak, Ethan stood. He spoke with a calm but unwavering voice. I made mistakes, he admitted. But the biggest mistake of my life was walking away from Isabel and our children. Not because I doubted her ability as a mother, but because I was too much of a coward to face my responsibilities. The judge listened intently. Ethan continued. Isabel has raised our children with nothing but love, sacrifice, and strength. She never once asked me for help. Not financially, not emotionally, and yet, despite everything, she still allowed me to be a part of their lives when I finally came back. That isn't the action of someone who's unfit. That's the action of someone who puts her children above everything else. Stella's lawyer objected, but Ethan wasn't finished. He turned directly to the judge. Stella is not fighting for the children's best interests. She's fighting to control me. She never cared about them before this, and she doesn't care about them now. This isn't about what's best for my sons. It's about revenge. A hush fell over the room. The judge's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his gaze. He called for a brief recess, and Stella shot Ethan a glare that could have burned through steel. But for the first time, she looked uncertain. After what felt like an eternity, the judge returned with a decision. The motion for custody change is denied. The existing custody arrangement will remain in place. Furthermore, any attempts to interfere with the children's well-being will result in legal consequences. The words hit Stella like a slap. Her face paled, her lips parting slightly in shock. Ethan exhaled, relief crashing over him. Isabel covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. It was over. As they left the courtroom, Stella caught Ethan's arm. "You think this is the end?" she hissed. "You think she'll ever really trust you?" Ethan turned to face her, his expression calm. "I don't have to prove anything to you, Stella. And trust? That's something I'll earn from Isabel every single day." Stella scoffed, stepping back. For the first time, she looked small, defeated. "You'll regret this," she muttered, before turning and disappearing into the crowd. Ethan turned back to Isabel, who was watching him with an unreadable expression. Slowly, she reached for his hand. "You meant that?" she asked softly. "Every word?" For the first time in what felt like forever, Isabel let out a deep breath, as if she were finally releasing the weight she had carried for years. "Maybe," she said, squeezing his hand. "We actually have a chance." Ethan smiled, bringing her hand to his lips. "We always did." And for the first time in a long time, neither of them had to fight alone. Life has a way of teaching us lessons through pain, regret, and unexpected turns. Ethan's story was never just about redemption. It was about learning that true love, whether romantic or parental, is built on action, not just words. It was about understanding that mistakes do not define a person, but what they do after those mistakes do. He had once let fear dictate his choices, but in the end, he chose courage, not the kind that comes with grand gestures or wealth, but the quiet, persistent kind. The kind that shows up every day, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be. For Isabel, the journey had been just as transformative. She had spent years carrying the weight of abandonment, believing she had to protect herself and her children from ever experiencing that kind of heartbreak again. But through all the challenges, she realized that protecting them didn't mean shutting the door on the past. It meant knowing when to open it and when to let someone prove they were worthy of walking through it again. She never needed Ethan to save her, and that was what made her strength so powerful. But in the end, she allowed herself to accept that strength wasn't just about standing alone. It was also about knowing when to share the burden. Their children, too, taught them one of the most important lessons of all, that love is not something that can be forced, bought, or dictated. It grows naturally when nurtured with patience, kindness, and sincerity. The boys had been hesitant at first, unsure of the man who had once been just a name in a story their mother never told. But with time, they saw Ethan for who he was. Not perfect, not without flaws, but someone who was willing to learn, to listen, and to be present. Perhaps the greatest lesson in all of this was that change is never instant. There is no magical moment where everything falls into place and all wounds are healed. Healing takes time. Trust is built brick by brick. Love is proven, not promised. Ethan did not expect forgiveness overnight, and Isabel did not give it lightly. But in the end, they both chose to believe in something bigger than their past. They chose to believe in the future they could build together. This story is a reminder to all of us that life will never be without obstacles. There will always be people like Stella who seek to manipulate, control, and destroy. There will always be moments when it feels easier to walk away than to face the pain of confronting what has been broken. But true strength is found in those who refuse to let fear or bitterness dictate their lives. True love is found in those who are willing to fight for it, even when it seems impossible. Ethan and Isabel's story is not just about second chances in love. It is about second chances in life. It is about breaking cycles, choosing differently, and understanding that while we cannot undo the past, we can always choose how we move forward. For anyone who has ever felt abandoned, for anyone who has ever struggled to forgive, for anyone who has ever questioned whether people are capable of change, this story is for you. It is a testament to the resilience of the human heart and the power of choosing to believe in something better. If this story moved you, if you found yourself rooting for love, for redemption, and for family, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you stories that touch the heart and inspire the soul. There are so many more stories waiting to be told, and we can't wait to share them with you. Stay with us, and let's continue this journey together.